discreetly. The idea that conversations shouldn't happen privately too, as Payan mentioned. The idea that everything needs to be on the table actually devalues words. It devalues actually the idea of diplomacy, of getting along together, finding a way to speak to one another such that it isn't a zero-sum game. And I think that is action, and I think that is civility. And with that in mind, I feel that we are all here from a shared impulse. But I would ask us to question some of the words that we use as kind of constitutive of this event, this idea, for example, of defending or fighting for freedom. Well, is it freedom an abstract concept, or are we fighting for specific freedoms? Specific freedoms mean that perhaps some of these freedoms aren't actually sustainable. What is sustainable about flying to Dubai, for example, to visit or to visit an art summit? What's sustainable about EasyJet vacations? What's sustainable about this constant consumption? What's sustainable about these borders that keep us in some freedoms to live, privileged of course, Western intelligentsia, if you want. What's sustainable about that? So there are some freedoms we have to let go of now. And I think that's what's making things a bit twisted and warped. There are some freedoms we're trying to agree perhaps are untenable in the long term. And it seems to me somehow that the fight is often between those who would hold on to every freedom at the cost of conflict or worse, or oppressing others, every freedom they can get their hands on, and we who actually take part in that, how can we freely let go of some of our freedoms? And I think that is a huge challenge, and that's a challenge for representing letting go of these things, not as necessarily loss, but as perhaps something, again, these words, something that it might be a pleasure to do. That's a challenge for artists. How can we renovate or define pleasure in line with this? But while we do so, how do we let go of our inner tyrant and not call each other out and not look for enemies within, which I see happening? And how can we, while doing so, maintain a place for what I really loved Laurie Anderson called yesterday, illuminated doubt. So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm not comfortable with microphones, so hopefully everybody can hear me. My name is Jorge, I'm from Puerto Rico. First I wanted to thank to the people that have talked about pleasure and joy and self-care. I think the beautiful reward of artists and creators is not just achieving freedom, but also joy, right? The systems that oppress us do so by making us burn out, by taking the joy out of the things that we create, out of the way that we experience our bodies and our thoughts. So I think that's a very, very important thing to mention. But actually I want to talk about the infrastructure and all the boring things that we talked about behind our communities. I'm hosted out of a community called Agora Collective in Neukölln, and along with one of the co-founders of Agora, we've started a company to basically offer the infrastructure for collectives of people to create their own job marketplace, to own the work that they do, and also split payments and split the value of those works. So they can create anything from a solidarity fund to just pay for rent for the space that they inhabit. It's called Coliga, and if there's anything that, anybody here that's interested in that kind of boring stuff and would like to help us experiment with how this platform, with how this model can be applied to different collectives, I'd love to talk to you. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Ivor Stodolski, Director of Perpetual Mobile, based in Berlin. I've been all over Europe to call myself European. Don't believe in national identification. So I wanted to ask actually why we're here today, really, because I didn't really know why I was coming here. I don't know whose revolution we're talking about, but I know that we're talking about fascism, right? We're also talking about a systemic crisis, and this is why we're talking about structures, right? Because everyone's talking about so-called boring structures. These boring, I don't think they're boring at all, very interesting structures. Super interesting structures have been creating crises for many hundreds of years. Now the question is, what is this systematic crisis right now? So we're dealing with another case, fascism. Is there another part of this systemic crisis? Is it called ecological crisis? Is it called financial crisis? So we have several crises we're facing, right? These are major, major, major crises. So I think I would take this hint we had at the beginning about stepping outside our world very, very seriously. So then I'm not going to give a long, big speech, I haven't prepared anything, but I think what we have to do is learn from history. Now, we're basically at an anniversary of a major cataclysm in human history, 1917, 100 years ago. And today we're faced with the problem we're going to have again a big split between different peoples who are, subject to total oppression and those which are uprising because they have nothing to lose. And there's going to be a lot of them. And it's happening already now. The question is, how do we make this happen without total catastrophe? Now, the only thing I would like to propose, before I lose myself in abstractions, is to talk about some experiences we've had as Perpetual Mobile. We've been lucky enough to be invited to something called the European Commons Assembly. This is something that took place it's taken place all over Europe in its own little forms, anything from a kitchen to a field in which people plant stuff together. The Commons, you've heard of it before, everyone knows what they're doing in that. And this is the first time that people from the Commons met in the European Parliament. And they actually met in the European Parliament and demanded of the Parliament, said, this is the only form of direct democracy we have, is these people that we elected, and what are we going to do? Is there an inter-Commons group? Yes, there is. Are they going to help us? Are we able to enter power, use those enormous structures of democracy that we built over 200 years to our benefit instead of fighting, actually reinvent them? Now, what I would like to propose is one of these things meeting every week. What could we call that? And I would propose we call it what everyone else is already calling it, which is like a Commons Assembly. There's a group here that's doing this with trans women. There's a group here that's doing that with, planting seeds. There's a group here that's doing that with building stuff together and growing flowers. So many different ideas, so many different ideologies, but they have something in common, and that's the Commons. So I would propose we talk about something called the Assembly of the Commons, following in the footsteps of Lyon, following in the footsteps of Brussels, of many other places, and meet under that title and start saying, hey, there's a bigger movement happening all over Europe. We don't have to reinvent it as curators, artists, critics. We can be part of something that's outside our world. Thanks.
Just thank you for that, and I'd like to speak towards that because I think one of the biggest things we were thinking about drawing up our initial kind of remit was the dissident movement, where the way I grew up in South Africa in the 70s and 80s, and my form of activism at the age of 15 was meeting 4 people in a room, and we were told where we were meeting half an hour before we were meeting, and we exchanged photocopies of Gramsci essays which we thought were absolutely revolutionary at the time, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think these kind of rituals of meeting and whatever you want to call it are the most important thing, and creating communities where not only communities of solace but also of anger and of solid planning. And I think I just want to reiterate that this is going on in 4 towns this week, and hopefully we're going to have very pragmatic outcomes. And amongst the kind of 2,000 odd emails we've already had replying to us, there are very, very solid calls for assistance and for help and offers of help. And I hope I'm not stepping out of my jurisdiction mentioning a few, but for instance, the Iranian pavilion at Venice Biennale has been cancelled because it was backed by American money, and so that, you know, they've approached us for assistance or for rehousing, or there's a teacher in rural Alabama who's got half her students are feeling absolutely mortified and persecuted, and the other half of the students are feeling empowered enough to persecute the other half, and she's in desperate need of a toolkit. You know, at Hangar 1, we had a lovely conversation recently, and that's in urgent need of assistance. So I think there's many projects that are coming, and I think there's very practical outcomes that we can achieve, you know, beyond just words. And I think the idea of meeting up often and discussing these things, and I think most important to us, because there's kind of 6 or 7 or 8 people in 5 different cities that are talking every Sunday. We spend 4 hours talking on a conference call. I think we seem to have struck a nerve in a few senses. One is there's not many organizations that are transatlantic, and I think the point is we're not only transatlantic, but we're speaking to people in Lagos, in South Africa, in Latin America, in South America, in Mexico. I think people have been facing this right-wing populist language and their revolution for many more years than we've suddenly, you know, awakened to. And I think it's really important to recognize that and not include them in a patronizing way, but that the conversation is absolutely inclusive in that way. So thank you for your comments.
Just I want to remind you that actually, I mean, Savi is also one of the spaces that is kind of trying to do something that in a way creates a discourse, a place where people are welcome, you're welcome. We have